In a distant village, there lived a young girl named Sarah. She had been blind since birth, and her family had abandoned her when she was just a child.
"She's useless," they said.
What could a blind girl possibly achieve? They left her to fend for herself in a dilapidated hut on the outskirts of the village. The hut was so fragile and unstable that even a mild gust of wind seemed capable of toppling it. Inside, the space was barren except for a dusty mat laid out on the uneven floor. Sarah spent her days sitting in the small hut, cold and hungry, with no one to care for her. Occasionally, kind-hearted villagers would stop by to offer her some food. "Sarah, take this," they would say, handing her small portions of yam, a bowl of soup, or a handful of beans. A few women even helped her wash and brought her old, worn clothes to wear. "Poor girl," they whispered among themselves. "May the gods watch over her." Although Sarah couldn't see their faces, she memorized the distinct sense of each visitor and the sound of their voices. Her world was wrapped in perpetual darkness, but her heart glowed with gratitude. Every time someone helped her, she would smile and say, "Thank you. May the gods bless you." But most days, she was utterly alone. She sat in silence, listening to the lively symphony of the village around her, the cheerful laughter of children playing, the rhythmic pounding of yam by the women, and the loud chatter and hearty laughter of the men gathered at the palm wine stand. She longed to witness these scenes, but her life was confined to the unrelenting blackness of her blindness. Sarah's existence was a cycle of loneliness, hunger, and neglect by the very family who should have loved her. Yet, despite her suffering, she remained gentle and appreciative of the small acts of kindness shown to her. Her story, however, was far from over. In the same village, there lived a man named Dek. He was a towering figure with arms as strong as tree trunks and a chest broad like a drum. Yet, his immense strength was matched only by the darkness in his heart. Everyone in the village was wary of him, for his behavior sent shivers down their spines. Dek had a habit of causing trouble and taking liberties he had no right to. He would pinch the cheeks of young women, grab their arms, or place his hands inappropriately on their backs as they passed by. His actions made the girls feel humiliated and afraid, but Dek brushed off their discomfort with a laugh. "What's wrong? I'm just being friendly," he'd say. But everyone knew there was nothing friendly about Dek's behavior. One day, Abo, the daughter of the village palm wine tapper, was returning from the stream. She was carrying a heavy clay pot of water balanced on her head, her bare feet carefully navigating the uneven path. Just as she was about to pass, Dek stepped into her way, a smug grin on his face. "Abo, don't you look lovely today?" he said, blocking her path. Abo tried to sidestep him, but he wouldn't let her pass. Suddenly, he reached out, pressing her back and letting his hand slide inappropriately. The sudden contact caused her to stumble, nearly dropping the pot of water. Tears welled up in her eyes as her cheeks burned with shame. Without a word, she turned and ran all the way home, leaving Dek behind, laughing loudly like a wicked crow. When Abo told her father what had happened, his anger was immediate. "Dek will not get away with this," he roared, grabbing his cane and storming toward Dek's hut. The villagers gathered, whispering among themselves, "It's about time someone stood up to him."
But Dek was ready.
When Abo's father confronted him, Dek smirked and, with one swift motion, snatched the old man's cane and pushed him to the ground. "Next time, I won't be so gentle," Dek sneered, his voice cold and menacing. From that day forward, the villagers knew they had to be cautious. Mothers warned their daughters to avoid Dek at all costs. Even the elders, who were usually fearless, remained silent, intimidated by Dek's strength and violent temper. Dek strutted around the village with arrogance, convinced that no one could stand against him. But as the old saying goes, no one is stronger than the gods, and every shadow eventually meets the light. Meanwhile, Sarah grew older. Though she still lived in darkness, she had blossomed into a young woman of remarkable beauty. Her face was smooth like the surface of a calm river at dawn, and her laughter had a magical quality that could brighten even the darkest mood. Yet, Her beauty was hidden beneath tattered clothes and unkempt hair that hung around her face like dried grass. One sunny afternoon, a kind-hearted woman named Nkichi visited Sarah. "My dear child," Nkichi said gently, "today, we'll make you feel like a queen." Nkichi brought warm water and soap, gently bathing Sarah as a mother would care for her child. She combed Sarah's hair with care, weaving it into neat, beautiful braids, and wrapped her in a vibrant, clean cloth. Finally, from her basket, Nkichi pulled out roasted yam and a small bowl of palm oil. "Eat, my dear," Nkichi said, her face soft with a motherly smile. "You deserve to feel joy." For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah laughed. Her voice was as sweet as a bird's song after a refreshing rain. Her face, now clean and radiant, glowed with a beauty that was no longer hidden. "Thank you, Nkichi," she said, her heart brimming with gratitude. But not everyone who saw Sarah that day had a kind heart. From the shadows of the bushes nearby, Dek stood watching, his eyes narrowing as he observed her transformation. For the first time, he truly noticed the blind girl's beauty. "She's stunning," Dek muttered, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "I must have her." That night, as the village rested under the watchful eye of the moon, Dek lay awake, Sarah's laughter replaying in his mind. The image of her glowing face consumed his thoughts, and a fire of desire burned within him, unrelenting. "She will be mine," he whispered to himself, his voice low and menacing. Unable to suppress his dark intentions, Dek sought out the village food cellar and bought a hot meal. Carrying it in his hands, he made his way to Sarah's fragile hut. Inside, Sarah sat quietly in the darkness, startled when she heard Dek's voice. "Sarah, it's me, Dek," he said, feigning kindness. "I brought you some food." Sarah smiled warmly.
"Thank you, Dek."
"May the gods bless you." She ate the meal gratefully, her empty stomach finally comforted. But as soon as she finished, Dek's tone shifted. "You're welcome, Sarah," he said, his voice turning cold. Without warning, he covered her mouth with his rough hand. Sarah struggled, her small frame no match for Dek's brute strength. "Please, no," she tried to cry, but her voice was muffled by his grasp. Dek ignored her desperate pleas. His heart was as cold as the stones beneath her feet. He forced himself upon her, leaving her sobbing and shattered on the dusty floor of her hut. Sarah's tears flowed like a relentless storm. She called out into the night, her voice heavy with anguish and pain. "May the gods judge you, Dek," she cried. But Dek, cruel and remorseless, paid no mind. He had committed similar atrocities against other women, even those who could see, and had never faced consequences. To him, curses were meaningless. They had never touched him before, and he continued to live unscathed. Yet the gods do not sleep. Dek's wickedness would not go unanswered. Sarah, broken in spirit and heart, knew she could no longer stay in the village. That night, under the pale glow of the moon, she took up her walking stick and set out, determined to leave her pain behind. Her bare feet met the cold earth with every step, and the rough ground scraped her hands and knees when she stumbled. "I must leave this place," she whispered, her voice trembling with sorrow and fear. As she ventured deeper into the silent forest, her stick tapping rhythmically against the ground, she suddenly heard footsteps. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice quivering. A gentle voice replied, "It's me, Koi. I'm a traveler passing through." Koi stepped closer, his eyes softening at the sight of her tear-streaked face and tattered clothing. "What are you doing out here alone at night?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Through her tears, Sarah shared her story of her blindness, her family's abandonment, and the evil Dek had inflicted upon her. Koi listened, his heart aching with compassion. "Don't cry, Sarah," he said softly. "You don't have to suffer alone anymore. I'll take you far from here." With gentle hands, Koi helped Sarah to her feet and guided her through the dark forest. Together, they left the village behind, stepping into a new chapter of her life. Years passed, and Dek was no longer the proud man he once was. After fleeing the village to escape whispers of his misdeeds, He settled in a new place where no one knew his dark past. He married, hoping to build a fresh start. But joy eluded him. Despite months of trying, his first wife couldn't conceive. One day, she wept in frustration. "What's wrong with you? Why can't we have children?" Unable to bear her shame, she left him. Desperate for a family, Dek married again. But the same fate awaited him. His second wife, too, failed to conceive and eventually abandoned him, declaring, "You're cursed, Dek. I want nothing to do with you." Overwhelmed by despair, Dek sought out herbalists and native doctors, spending all his money on rituals and charms. Yet each time, he was met with the same grim answer. "You need forgiveness," the herbalists told him. "Return to the one you wronged." But Dek was lost. Who could that person be? One day, desperate for answers, he visited a renowned herbalist known for his wisdom and spiritual connection. After listening to Dek's tale, the herbalist stared into a calabash filled with sacred water. "It is clear now," the herbalist said, his voice deep and foreboding. "You wronged a blind girl named Sarah. Only her forgiveness can break this curse." Dek's heart sank as memories of his past sins with Sarah flooded his mind. "Where can I find her?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You must search for her," the herbalist replied firmly. "Without her forgiveness, your suffering will only deepen." Dek knew there was no other way. He set out on a journey to find Sarah, determined to seek her mercy, though fear lingered in his heart about what he might uncover. Returning to his old village, Dek felt a wave of dread. The place had changed over the years, yet the weight of his past sins seemed heavier than ever. With each hesitant step, he approached hut after hut, asking the villagers, "Do you know where Sarah is?" Some simply shook their heads. "Sarah? The blind girl? She's dead," they replied, pity lining their voices. Others recalled her, but their answers offered no clarity. "She left one night and never returned," they said. Dek felt his hope slipping through his fingers like sand. Could it be true? Had Sarah truly died? If so, his curse would remain forever. Just as despair began to consume him, Dek spotted a familiar face. It was Aboba, the palm wine tapper's daughter. "Aboba," he called out, his voice unsteady. She turned to face him, her expression hardening. "What do you want, Dek?" she demanded sharply. "I've come to seek forgiveness," he admitted, his gaze falling to the ground. "Do you know what became of Sarah?" Aboba studied him for a long moment before letting out a sigh.
"Follow me," she said.
She led Dek down a winding path that stretched beyond the borders of the village. They walked until they reached a grand mansion, its walls towering and gleaming under the sun's golden light. Dek's jaw dropped in disbelief. "Who lives here?" he asked in a whisper, his voice betraying his awe. "You'll see," Aboba replied, knocking on the mansion's massive wooden door. Moments later, the door creaked open, and Dek's heart nearly stopped. Standing before him, dressed in elegant clothes and radiating confidence, was Sarah. She was no longer the blind, vulnerable girl he had wronged, but a poised woman with a commanding presence and warmth in her eyes. Sarah's life had undergone a miraculous transformation. After Koi rescued her from the forest, he brought her to a land of plenty, where she was embraced and cared for. A wise native doctor performed sacred rituals that restore her sight. For the first time, Sarah saw the beauty of the world, the vibrant sky, the lush trees, and the kind face of the man who had saved her. As the days turned into months, Koi and Sarah grew closer, their love blossoming like flowers after a nourishing rain. They married and built a beautiful home filled with laughter, love, and joy. What was once a dark, lonely existence for Sarah had become a life brimming with light and happiness. But on this day, as Dek stood before her, her past surged back with an intensity she hadn't expected. Though her eyes now saw clearly, her ears recognized the voice immediately. "Dek," she said coldly, her tone sharp like the edge of a blade. Dek dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Sarah," he pleaded, his voice choked with emotion. "I've come to beg for your forgiveness." Dek's voice broke as he pleaded, I wronged you terribly, Sarah, and I have suffered every day since. Please forgive me." Sarah's eyes blazed with fierce intensity. "You left me broken, Deck," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "Do you even understand the pain you caused me?" Deck sobbed openly. "I know, Sarah. I know. The gods have punished me, and I have come to make things right. Please give me a chance." Sarah took a deep breath, her heart a whirlwind of emotions, anger, sorrow, and the peace she had built in her new life. Finally, she spoke. "Your sins are great, Deck, but I will hear you out." Grateful for the opportunity, Deck bowed his head as Sarah led him into her grand home. They sat in the spacious courtyard, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Koi stood nearby, his calm demeanor masking his protective watchfulness. Deck, still on his knees, continued his plea. "I have lived in misery for years. I cannot find peace unless you lift this curse from my life," he said, tears streaming down his face. Sarah looked at him, her expression softening but still filled with resolve. "Deck, your sins brought me unimaginable pain," she began. "But they also brought me 2 blessings." She clapped her hands, and moments later, 2 young boys ran out from the house. They were identical, their strong builds and sharp features unmistakably mirroring Deck's own. Deck's eyes widened in shock, his breath catching in his throat. They are mine," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Yes," Sarah said firmly. "These are your sons." But they were raised by Koi, who gave them the love and care you never could. The boys stood tall beside their mother, their expressions curious, but respectful. Deck reached out, his hands shaking. "My sons," he murmured. Sarah gently stopped him. "I forgive you, Deck," she said, her tone both compassionate and resolute. "But you cannot be part of their lives. They have grown up in a home filled with love and respect, and I will not disrupt that." Deck bowed his head, his heart heavy yet strangely relieved.
"Thank you, Sarah."
"Your forgiveness is more than I deserve." He stood, his legs unsteady, and turned to leave. As he walked away, Koi stepped beside Sarah, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You have done what many could not," he said softly. Deck returned to the herbalist, who greeted him with a knowing smile. "The curse has been lifted," the herbalist said. "You are free to live a new life." Deck nodded, the weight of his past finally lifting from his shoulders. Determined to make amends, he returned to his old village with a renewed purpose. His first stop was the home of Ihu's father, the man whose daughter he had once wronged. The old man, now gray and frail, opened the door with wary eyes. "What do you want, Deck?" he asked, his voice tinged with caution. Deck knelt before him, his head bowed. "I have come to seek your forgiveness," he said sincerely. "I wronged you and your daughter, and I am deeply sorry." The old man studied him for a long moment before replying. "If the gods have truly changed your heart, who am I to hold on to anger? You are forgiven." From there, Deck went to the village elders. He confessed all his past misdeeds and begged for their forgiveness, vowing to protect the vulnerable and ensure no one else suffered as Sarah had. Seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the elders granted him their blessing. Finally, Deck approached Aboba, the palm wine tapper's daughter. "Aboba," he said gently, "I have hurt you in the past. But I am a changed man. Will you give me a chance to make things right? Will you be my wife?" Aboba, who had observed Deck's transformation from afar, nodded after a moment of thought. "Yes, Deck. I believe in second chances." Their marriage was celebrated with joy throughout the village, and soon after, Aboba gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Deck, once feared and despised, became the village's protector. He dedicated his life to ensuring that no girl or woman would ever endure the pain he had caused. Deck's transformation became a testament to the power of redemption and change. The villagers, once scornful of him, now spoke of him with respect. "Even the darkest heart can find light," they said. And so, Deck, once a symbol of fear, became a beacon of hope, proving that no matter how deep the darkness, redemption is always within reach.